Hey vinyl community, Jeff here again. I'm going to do another contest entry. There are a lot of contests going out and about. I've been jotting down notes, ones that I could easily knock out. In this particular case, this is for Dennis over at Analog Archives. He has reached the milestone of 2,000 subscribers. So he's celebrating with a contest. And it's pretty simple. And I actually did two separate lists and decided to go one way or another. But we're talking mainly about the second album, the Sophomore album by a band, when it is as good or better than the debut. So, you know, I did notice in going through my list that I found some that I'm like, was worse. You know, we could do a contest on where the Sophomore album was worse than the debut. So let's jump into this. Now, what I did, I've seen a couple other people do this. And there are some big ones out there that immediately come to mind. So I've been trying to stray away from those. And I wanted to go a little more obscure. And so let's get into this. I don't want to waste too much time. I know some of these videos can get real drawn out. I'm not going to say a whole lot about them either. So let's just get right into it. Violence and Force by Exciter. Heavy Metal Maniac was the first album. Now the difference, I think this album's a little better. That's another thing, is he was saying, you know, whether he likes it the same, better, etc. Heavy Metal Maniac was very raw. And this, I think, is what affects a lot of albums. First albums tend to be low budget. Record companies don't put a lot into it. So they almost come off sometimes as more raw, not a lot of money behind them, demo quality. Sometimes they are just a demo. So you expect the second album to be, usually, have a little more money in it. A little more production. So it's definitely the case here. Both albums are amazing. I don't know which I like better. I think they were both very much on par. This is where I discovered the band, so this to me is a little more nostalgic. Pounding metal, songs like that just take me back to these days. Violence and Force, just the opening track, Oblivion, just noise and greatness. It's both albums to me go hand in hand, though I think the ever so slight better production feel on this gives it just a little bit of a leg up. Absolutely, you know, love these early Dan Bueller years. Now, after this, you know, the next album, simply amazing. And the one after that had some weak spots. So, you know, it's touch and go on some of this. All right, up next is a band that I'm sure not a ton of people are going to know about as much, FlyingColors. They have 3 albums out. This is their second. I thought their first album was off the charts. So it's always tough to beat that. And then the second album came out. We used to play this in the car all the time, and my kids just loved it too. It's as good as. It's first album amazing, and the second album just as amazing. Third album is amazing, but we won't go there. I just haven't connected with that. I need to spend more time with that one. Didn't seem to connect with it immediately like I did the first 2. So the first 2 are right in that sweet spot. And if you don't know FlyingColors, Mike Portnoy on drums, Neil Morse on keys and singing. You got Steve Morse on guitar. It's a super group, you know. Casey, people that have been in other bands, and it's just melodic, borderline prog at times. It's kind of like a bunch of prog guys getting together and doing radio-friendly tunes is kind of what the intent was. But it still has some weird time changes and some really cool stuff in it, but it really comes across as more of a commercial effort. And so the first album just, came out of the gates. It blew me away just with what they did. But then when they came to this one, it's a lot of the same. The highlights are, you can see videos online, Mass Machine, things like that. There are some, just the harmonies, because everybody in the band sings. Most of the guys sing. Well, yeah, most of the guys sing. And so you've got this influence of all the guys by bands like, you've got the prog, yes, the Gentle Giant, the Genesis with all the multi-layer vocal type harmonies. You got the Beatle influence in there, all the different harmonies of yesteryear brought in with an amazing set of musicians to do just an amazing set of songs. And I think the first and second album for sure. Third album is just, like I say, it's just as great, but it hasn't really stuck with me as much. But if you haven't checked them out and you like just great, intensely talented music that still has a commercial and, hooks and stuff, then check out FlyingColors for sure. Like I said, they got 3 albums out now. Hopefully they'll be doing something in the future. All right, another one, second album, Fastway, All Fired Up. Absolutely love the first Fastway album. When it came out, I loved it, still love it. So it's tough, you're like, where can they go from there? But really, All Fired Up to me is, these albums kind of go hand in hand. To me, both albums are just right there in the sweet spot. All Fired Up, just, every song on here just is great to me, as was the first album. And it's a band that didn't get a lot of attention. People mention them now and then, but for me, the first two go hand in hand as being just top notch, and I think that they're on par with each other. I don't know which one I like best. I probably still lean towards the first one, only because it's where I cut my teeth, and only because I listened to it so much more back in the day. But I think I equally love them on par with each other for the most part. Just I'm more familiar with the first one. All right, getting again. Now this, again, well, let's just jump into it. KingsX, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. First album, second album, there's a slight difference, I feel, musically in some ways. But the first album blew me away. The first album, the songs, and I mentioned them the other day because back in the days when I was into the KingsX era, I was really mostly into Christian music. And KingsX fit into that because the first album had a very strong spiritual influence, lots and lots of spiritual imagery. They had been involved in Christian music prior to their solo album, and it bled over here. Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, the whole thing, it kind of feels like a Tolkien or C.S. Lewis type novel aspect to it. It's got a lot of that imagery that crosses over into that type of, spiritual touchings on without being preachy. And I think on the second album, here comes a dog. On the second album, we get a little more. The first album had a very grooving appeal, and this one takes it to the next level. It's not a drastic change, but there are some tweaks here and there that I think really kind of boost this. And so I would have to say on these, both of these are still on par with each other. Wow. I would be hard pressed to try to decide one over the other. There's enough differences to make them both well loved. It's not like you're getting a cookie cutter appeal, but on the other hand, you're getting the same feel. And yeah, it'd be tough. These first two, I think, are absolutely, in my opinion, probably two of their best. And then after this, it's touch and go. Some of their things there's some oddities that come in for me, and they kind of, it's a little more inconsistent. These first two albums, I think, are very consistently great, and I just would have a hard time really ranking them. It's just, I don't know. I probably grabbed it for the first album more just because I think I probably spent more time with it back in the day, but I don't know. I spent so much time with this too. Yeah, so yeah, I think in this case, the second album is as good, if not better. It's just really tough to rank these babies, like choosing your favorite kids. All right, and this album, I think in some, well, whatever. Let's get into this one. The Right to Rock by Keel. I think, in some ways, I think this probably is better. Now, the major difference is the first album was on Shrapnel, minor label. This one is on a major label, A&M. You've got better production. You've got more money behind it. I think the first album is very gutsy, very raw, very well produced, very well produced. There's not Shrapnel is by no way, child's label. They put out some amazing stuff. A little bit more polished on this. You got the MTV video and stuff. And so I think this is where they really got, the band Keel obviously got more publicity from the label. They had a video. They got a little more popular. And I think a lot of people may think this is the first album because the other album, is on a smaller label. But to me, this stepped up in production. Songwriting is very much anthemic, 80s type stuff. But both albums are absolutely great albums. I love Keel, and the early stuff was just really ballsy stuff, great vocalist. But I think in some ways the production and overall value of this album may just inch out the other. The other one is very much hard rocking for those of us who don't mind a little bit more on the raw side of it. But yeah, they're both very high quality, but I think this one probably, for most people, a little more polished sounding, and so probably would outrank it. I think, to me, they're both equally great, though I think this one might inch out the first one just a hair. Just a hair. This is a funny one. This is a funny one. This is a funny one to me, at least. Because when people say this band, they may not even think of these albums. Project in the Jungle by Pantera. So yeah, the first 4 Pantera albums, totally different band, pretty much different style for sure. This is back in the heyday when the boys in Pantera were have more of an 80s look, less of a extreme hard look. And I think all 4 albums are great. They did, they had different singer on these early albums, and to me, it's excellent 80s hair metal, whatever you want to call it. I think these early albums are really good, and I think by the second album, they had really, more established themselves with a better feel than the first. I mean, I really love them all. Third album, it just got a little better. Then of course they got the singer. Fourth album, Phil came in, and they went on with the actual 5th album would have been Cowboys from Hell Idea, where they really changed up the sound. But yeah, I really appreciate these early days, and I just think first album was great. Second album was probably a little greater. Yeah, early Pantera. I think the second album was, it was great, and I think it was probably just a little greater. Okay, let's go with some Raven, Wiped Out. First album, very raw, very, probably lower budget. Just, the band had some great songs that probably, I think, mostly are still popular and in their set these days, to this day. This is a step up. The band really had established themselves. It's got some amazing songs on here, and I think it's, again, this is going to be one of those from the era where, the first album was probably a little more lower budget than the second. But I think song-wise, the band is just on the same par. And you can really see maybe a little more maturity. I think by the third album, it even got more so. All for One, that's where I discovered them. So that's probably a little more well-known to me before going back and spending years with this. But yeah, I mean, this is just Faster Than Speed. There's a lot of these songs too. A lot of these songs that are still a staple that the band play. So these early albums, because they have a lot of albums, but I think these earlier ones tend to be the ones that they still draw from, that fans have. And for me, I probably would reach for this maybe quicker than the first, but I don't know. The first one's so good. Yeah. It'd be tough. I'm going to say they're equally as good. I just think that this one may outshine a little bit better on production. I'm trying to think. Song-wise, yeah, I don't know. There's so many great classics on both of them. It'd be, again, it's tough. It's kind of tough to rank these sometimes because these are all a lot of these are part of my young adolescence, early years, and so we just loved everything back then, and they became so ingrained in us that sometimes it's really hard to differentiate which one would really be better for what reason. So I'm going to say this one might inch it out just a little. But, again, I think they were on a roll, and it just got better. Of course, they went through a phase a little bit later where they were forced to go more commercial. I like that stuff, but, there's no, the first 3 albums are always going to be that raw Raven feel before they kind of got shoved into more of a commercial feel. And then now the stuff that they've been doing recently, I have not heard their newest album yet, but the ones before that and everything with the new drummer and everything, they still got it. They are just up there with some super tight, amazing stuff. But we won't go there because that's a whole different story. TheRods, New York band, second album, just called TheRods. First album was very good. It was, but it was, again, I think probably a little lower budget. Second album, they had established themselves a little more. And it's got some really great stuff on here. I'm really glad that High Roller Records reissued all of these albums with all these bonuses and stuff. And so, you got Power Lover, Hungry for Some Love. They're very manly type band. Very, it was the 80s. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So a lot of women-related type songs of risque amounts of lyrical content. So raw, you know, three-piece, just raw rockin' stuff. Carl Kennedy on drums, just has done some amazing work through the years with producing bands and playing on bands. And so I think all of the early Rods album, and they're still going. They have had recent albums in the past 10 years. And I just think that the original stuff, the early days stuff with the first 4 or 5 albums are, they must have. They're prime, great, just solid hard rock from the 80s that we were just digging a lot. And I think in some ways I have fond feelings for both albums, but I'm going to say this one probably just was a step forward. I think between the production and the maturity, the maturity of the songs, playing wise, you know, again, lyrically, sometimes it comes off a little 80s cheese, but again, that's where it was, that's how it was. And it's fun to listen to. So yeah, went with TheRods and their second album. And then I went ahead and jumped into what I would consider a big name, but probably not what a lot of people do, but Saxon, Wheels of Steel. First Saxon album, you know, that was when they were called SOB. They changed the name, they put out the album. The album had a slightly different feel. I think by this point, they really found their footing. And this album and the next album and the next album, I think are probably still... The Motorcycle Man, 747, Wheels of Steel, I'm pretty sure to this day they still play those. Susie Hold On, probably occasionally. This is the pinnacle. This and Strong Arm of the Law, those 2 albums I think still hold a lot of places in their set list. Because this is a classic. For me, Denim and Leather is absolutely tops only because that's where I discovered them. The first 2 albums, the second and third album, the first album I don't think I ever listened to back in the 80s. We knew Strong Arm, we knew Wheels of Steel, we knew Denim and Leather. I fell in love with Crusader. That's Power and Glory was kind of, I didn't really, for some reason, didn't connect with that one as much. But Crusader, Denim and Leather, and the 2 prior to that, you had to have those 4 for sure, at least in my opinion. And so I think this second album by Saxon is really where they found their footing, established themselves. First album was great, but I think this album is greater. It's more, a little more polished. And I think overall, the songwriting really fell into place. And this is where they became the powerhouse band that they later continued to go on to be and are still to this day putting out material. Carpe Diem, the previous actual album, was still, those guys are just still amazing. And the 2 Inspiration albums are fun to throw out there, but, you know, will they get a lot of listens? Probably not. They're nowhere near on par with what Saxon is. So to me, those were kind of like, you know, give us something new. Second album, I think, is a big step forward from the first album. Sophomore album, in this case, I think is better, though I love the first one. That's it for this one, 10. Like I say, I had so many more I thought about, but I wanted to go with some that were maybe a little less on the path that everybody else is going to be beating down for this. Anyway, so that's it for this one. Thanks a lot. Make sure you check out the contest. Jump on it. You've got a little bit of time left, and I will see you later. Rock on and rock hard.